So I have two hats that help you, because I've had two careers in my lifetime. I'm a public policy person, but I also have a master's degree in urban planning.
Okay.
And I was in that field for about 10 years. And in urban planning, planners spend a ton of time just conveying information to the public, right? Mm-hmm. This construction project is going on. What's happening on what schedule? When will the roads be closed? You know, when will your water be shut off? That kind of thing. I did environmental planning, and so I actually had to go out to the public and explain pretty complex kind of environmental laws and what was going on with that. And so I feel like that's the university's, in my experience, the university's gap is they have very complex things to express that don't have immediate impact on everybody in the general public, right? They can't just go out and buy TV time and put out a commercial because not everything they do impacts everybody, right? So they have a couple problems. The first problem is figuring out the audience that they need to be communicating this information to, and then simplifying it to the point where they're taking all of the acronyms and the university speak, and if it's medical information, the jargon out, and telling people, like, this is what we discovered, or this is the information we have, and this is how it impacts you. And that's a very kind of urban planner thing to think about. That's kind of urban planner's job in that process, is conveying to the public, this is how it's going to impact you, and this is why it's going to be better for you, right? But I agree that my experience with universities is that they're very proud of their research, and they know how to disseminate it in academia, right? So other universities think it's cool, but that doesn't always leak out to the communities they're serving.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
So from a medical research standpoint, sitting in this office, the medical research standpoint, people want to know when can I access it, even if you haven't proved it is 100% cure what I have, when can I access it? Yeah. And they're great at saying, well, it's in this phase of trial. Well,
that doesn't mean anything.
That doesn't mean anything to people. And so, and universities have a structure to disseminate information to other universities, right? They don't have as great a structure to disseminate it to people. They don't have Jim Hurley, he's on staff, that their job is to tell the communities what they're doing. And I think that those are big barriers for them. But I don't know whether, what I can't answer is, does that even matter to them?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they're not going to fix the problem unless it's a problem for them. I will say that I'm from a state, I'm from Indiana, where the state, when I was lobbying in Indiana, the state kept cutting the portion of state funding that went to the universities. And as that went down, the universities started hiring more people to do exactly what we're talking about, because they needed money from other places, right? And the only way they were going to get money from non-university other people is if they could
go out to the community
and say, this is the great things we're doing. And so I saw that happen in Indiana, where as the state funding went down, their willingness to hire people like Jim Hurley to communicate that to funders, to potential funders, went up. It shouldn't be the case, but they basically needed more money, and if the state wasn't going to kick it in, they went looking elsewhere. And that's when they figure that out, when they have to figure that out. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, because and it's now all coming together, because what my final is writing recommendations for a university.
Yeah.
So after the interview, I go and I'll probably do UNC, because I'm doing my master's through ASU online.
Okay.
And she said to research ASU, and I forget what she called it. Their community engagement, we'll just say. But if we're not in the state, then do a local university. So then I'll go research the community engagement in, say, UNC, and then listen back to our interview, and then play off
kind of what you heard.
Yes.
Because that's the gap you're trying to fill, is right?
Yes.
Where they are and where they should be.
Yes.
Yeah. And UNC, I would assume, is probably better at it than
because it's a smaller university.
It's a smaller university. The smaller universities and the campuses of big universities that are in more rural areas, in my opinion, in my experience, tend to be more connected to the community, because they have to be. Yeah. Just like everything else in a more rural area has to be more connected to everything else. Yep. The big university, I deal with the University of Colorado and a lot of friends here. And it's like they are, I probably shouldn't say this on tape, but
No.
they are a little government in and of themselves. They're
Yeah.
a little government country in and of themselves. To get to the person you need to get a person to make a decision, and it's because they have a big bureaucracy that knows how to talk university, but doesn't know how to talk anybody else most of the time.
When I was doing my internship with the American Cancer Society, they hired on a new fundraiser who was previously at CSU, and I remember somebody, just even with CSU, somebody was like, "Oh, how did you like CSU?" And she's like, "It was very political." So it's just reminds me of
there's a lot of bureaucracy. A lot of bureaucracy, and it's not necessarily, I shouldn't say that there's more bureaucracy, it's just
different.
It's academia runs a little differently. There's a path, and that's the path you take, and there's no, like, we're scrappy, we're used to nonprofits, we're used to, like, let's figure out how to get to there and let's do it the most efficient way possible,
and getting the most out of our resources.
The bigger the university, in my experience, the more the pathways are just stuck there, and it doesn't, that's the way you've got to go, even if it's 20 miles out of your route. And I think that hinders them. That hinders their ability to be flexible to the community, especially if things shift, right? If some I'm in the government relations business, and sometimes it's not up to you, right? Something happens in the community, and it shifts an entire election, and there's nothing the candidates did. It was some outside force that maybe one candidate or another had a worse answer than the other candidate, and all of a sudden you're in this issue, and this issue, you didn't make this issue, it just fell in your lap. And I feel like the smaller campuses of big universities and the smaller universities are far more flexible in hearing what's going on, because they're in the community, they're the people making the decisions are in the community.
Yeah. So maybe I'll look at CSU then.
So I think
to really get the most out of the project.
It just depends. I mean, they're both going to have different. My guess is both of them are going to have these problems.
Yeah.
It's just they're going to be different. The bigger campus versus the smaller campus. Yeah. And honestly, if you want to make your research help your community, you could take your own advice, and once you finish, you could do CSU, and once you finish your assessment, you let them have it. Say, hey, boop, you know what I mean? You and let what you've learned and what you have come up with inform them, and they're probably far more likely to be like, oh, okay, this is interesting, let's talk, as opposed to the university.
So what department would you recommend? Because that's my thing when I approach a university, because I've been trying to get into CSU just to have the walk there, and I just feel like I call everybody and I just don't know where to start. And nobody knows where to refer you to.
Right, because they don't have anything kind of set up like that, except they should have an events. Where I would go is the chancellor.
Okay.
Because the person who sets up events, I mean, for the walk, I would go to the chancellor's office, because the person who says yes or no to a big event like that on campus is going to work for the chancellor, even if it's
you
several
don't get
people
directly
down.
to
You know what I mean? At least the chancellor's office is going to have the whole the whole university
under their wing.
Right, under their wing. I liken it to, I served, I almost said church, because I served on my church board, and I had no idea that my church did some of the stuff it did until I got on the board, and I had that perspective, and I'm like, oh, look at that. And that's what the chancellor's office is. It's the umbrella. And so I would always, if you don't know where to go in the university, I would start there. And there's got to be somebody that is event planning to some scale that could answer that question for you.
Okay.
But I hear you. Like, yeah. When I deal with the university, Rachel haven't dealt with it yet, but I've had two events now with the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus with the Rocky Mountain Alzheimer's Disease Center, and the minute you step on their campus, the whole government relations team, of which there are like a dozen of them, including someone in DC, gets involved, right? The minute you step on campus. And we usually are bringing members of Congress. So we're going on their campus, we're bringing a member of Congress. All 12 or so of the government affairs professionals are now involved. And then they're required by campus policy or university policy to include the chancellor and the dean of the public health school, of every related school. So public health, the dean of the medical school, whatever campus you're on, the person who runs that campus, plus the people who are in the equivalent of like home office for us, for the university. You have to invite, no, not all those people don't necessarily have to come, but you have to invite
them,
all of those people, and
just so they know you're there.
Just so they know you're there, and that's the first thing they do. Like, it's not even a question whether that happens or not. And so, the first time we were there in 2016. We're having a big event, so it didn't matter that they invited 50 billion people, because we invited 50 billion people too. The second time, we had one member of Congress that we got time with, and we just wanted to bring him into the Rocky Mountain Alzheimer's Disease Center and have our meeting in their offices with a couple representatives, and they had like 20 people. We brought my 4-man team, ambassador team, and they brought like 20 people, and it took most of the meeting to introduce ourselves, and so we lost the ability to sit across from the congressman and say, this is what we want, because they're all introducing themselves. And so to some extent, I decided then we're not doing this anymore. We are actually partnering with them on an event, and we're not bringing it to campus for that reason. We're not stepping foot on their campus solely because that's what happens.
The
when
barriers
you step foot on their
you
campus.
have to jump through.
Right. And so I don't know. It's interesting that your job is to tell them how to change that, because that's like saying to a government, like, change the structure of how you function.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely, like, more nimbleness would be, yeah. However they make that happen would be a fantastic kind of thing. And hiring people who can talk non-university, right? I mean, once you get in the university
make it
system,
understandable.
It's a whole new language, and I get that.
Relatable.
I have a whole language in policy. Rachel and I do when we're talking to people.
Yeah, that's a whole
policy.
different language too.
Right, it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Part of our job, a big chunk of our job, is to be able to explain that to people who don't know, right? I have to teach ambassadors how to go lobby or advocate. I have to talk to legislators who don't have a background in that subject matter, and so we're conditioned to be able to know the audience and do it. I feel like the university's smart enough to know their audience. They're just not nimble enough to
act on it.
And they don't have people who think as much who's the audience as they do university speak, because they're just so embedded in the university 24/7. And I don't know whether that's creating more positions or being involved more in the community, being out in the community more, having more of the people in the university at decision-making levels actually not doing university work, but it's the same thing. They have a language in and of that. You guys have a walk language, they have a university language, and it's hard to get them knocked out of that when they're talking to people in the community.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think they're so embedded in the university? Just because?
I personally think one of the reasons is because the university is typically the largest employer in any community. And they can do whatever they want, right? I mean, they have the power to say, you come to me. And so I use this analogy all the time, and it's from my urban planning days. If this is a road, right, and here's the yellow line in the middle, and here's a sidewalk, and here's a sidewalk, and the community's on this sidewalk, and the university's on this sidewalk, if the university is the biggest employer by,
the community's going to go to them.
The university's going to hang out on their sidewalk and say, you come all the way to me. They're not going to meet anybody on the center line, right? They don't have to. Honestly, that's sort of what happened in Indiana. They were required, because the state was cutting their money, they had no choice but to meet the community in the center line, because they weren't going to get funded. They weren't going to get funding otherwise. I mean, you can manhandle only so much, and then at some point, when the community says, I'm at the center line, come over or not, when their existence is on the line, they're going to come into the center line. You know what I mean? To force them to do that. And some universities don't need to do that, because they're the biggest employer, and they're connected. They're a satellite campus that doesn't have control. Like, that's who I feel the worst for, is the satellite campuses that haven't. They're just being told this is the way it is, and they have to play that game, right? Because they're like a regional office to the Denver. Have to play that game. You have no choice.
It's a good analogy.
But that doesn't allow them the flexibility that the community needs.
That's a really good analogy with regional offices, and not even just the Denver office, our national office as a whole.
We have multiple layers of that now. Home office to here, here out there, and every step you go. The job is to take what you're given by the people above you and make it work for you. And they're doing the same thing. And satellite, and unless it's a university that's in and of itself located, one place, then they should have an easier time being more flexible. But the satellite campuses, I would imagine, have a harder time, because there's more of that, like, no, you have to do this. And so I I have felt that from the day I've got into this job. Is my job is to find the middle ground between what the DC office wants and what I can do. That still satisfies what they want, but in the way that is the best for Colorado, and that's 100% of my job. And that's their job as well. And when you spend all day doing that, how much do you consider what the community wants? You know,
because you're so consumed by
I need to
pleasing two opposing parties.
I need to split this. Going here is like, that's one more I don't need. And if I don't need to deal with the community, then but then the community has no idea what's happening in those buildings other than teaching, right? But the non-teaching part, which I think is what you're talking about. You know, the building's there and the people who are employed in it know what's going on, but the rest of the community doesn't necessarily know what's going on. And some of it doesn't help the community, right? If somewhere at MIT there's a lab that's spewing out things that are going into the space station, right? Do they need to explain to the public that? Not only do they probably not need to explain that, there are probably patents and intellectual property issues where they can't explain that. But most of what the university does is not that, right? Most of what the university does eventually, even if it's several steps down the line, will have a use. It's just a matter of what that is and whether it's worth explaining, right, to the public. You know. Some of it, like, public's like, oh, I don't care that's going on there.
Exactly.
You know, unless it's going to harm me or not harm me.
It depends on what the community wants. Right. If you're, say, we're in Clearwater, Florida, I just say that because it's like a retirement community, and say Alzheimer's diagnoses are on the rise. They might go to university and say, we want research. This is what we want to know. So. If you've got a scientific hub, then you're going to be doing more scientific stuff. Is that eventually going to benefit the public? Sure. But it may be years before. You know, I mean, radar was developed for the military. There's all kinds of stuff that was developed for the military. And it has practical uses to all of us, but we didn't see it until after it was already used and abused by the military. You know, not abused in that way, but used and they figured it out in the military, they deployed it in the military, and then once they were like, okay, everybody's got it now, we'll release it to the public, and so then you get the benefits of that. And there's some of that too, but you know, especially in agricultural community, I would think that an agricultural community with an agriculturally based university would actually do more of that, right? Because they can help each other, and they know they can help each other, and those communities tend to be more rural, and again, in rural areas there tends to be more of a symbiosis with the university, because that's who they're serving. You know what I mean? I mean, in Indiana, most of the ag kind of stuff happened outside of Indianapolis, because but I wouldn't know what to tell them to change other than to be more flexible. I mean, that's So on personal inquiry sides of the interview, so that's talking about you. So my first question I have is, what is your one dream and the one passion you want to see become a reality in your work?
Professionally, it would be super cool to work myself out a job, right? I tell people all the time, I'm not interested in retiring from this job. I want it to not exist, because in my business, you almost never actually fully solve a problem, especially in healthcare. There are actually problems that have been fully solved. Healthcare, not necessarily one of them. But it would be incredible for somebody to come up with that, you know, magic bullet and be like, I'll go work on something else. Especially since not that many people know this, but I have a parent who just over this Thanksgiving holiday, we're trying to get my mom to go to a neurologist, because I know she has dementia, but she doesn't know. I think it did it. So I had it in my family before. Now it's my mother. So I have other additional reasons. But from a professional standpoint, no one ever works themselves out of job, right? You never fix everything completely. And so how cool would it be to basically, like, we don't have to be here anymore. I can go solve another problem. I think that never happens in my business. You know.
That's a good.
Professionally,
you never think about that.
You don't think about that.
How did you get here? So you said you started in urban planning.
I did. So
what was your aha moment that was like, I want to go work in public policy?
So I started in public policy.
Okay.
And this is a true story. Pizza. That's how it got me into public policy. I went to Indiana University, and I was still floating around with majors, and I had a friend who said, hey, I have a Bachelor of Science in Public Policy, and so the School of Environmental Affairs of Public Policy and Environmental Affairs on IU's campus. I was down there. I was going to school, and a friend of mine was like, "SPIA, the School of Public and Environmental Affairs, is having free pizza night. You just have to go listen to what they have to say." I'm like, "Sure, I'll go for free pizza."
Yeah.
So I was sitting there, and I realized there's like a dozen students listening, and well, there are a dozen students sitting in there. I was the only person listening, and so as the 3 professors who taught all the classes, because there was a very small number of students who got this degree, as the professors were talking about all these classes, I'm like, well, that would be interesting. Well, that would be interesting. I found myself eating pizza going, well, that would be interesting. That would be interesting. And when they got done, I'm like, well, that's a whole major. Like, if I'm this interested, I should probably talk to these guys.
Yeah.
I was the only student that stayed and talked to them. And the next week, I was a public policy major.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I did that. I actually worked on Capitol Hill in D.C. For a couple members of Congress for about 5 years right after I graduated. I graduated and moved to D.C. And then moved back to Indiana and was lobbying for doctors for the American Medical Association. And
So were you a contract lobbyist?
I was not, actually.
Okay.
So here, if you're a lobbyist, although I'm a lobbyist and Rachel's a lobbyist, we're registered, but most of us are actually contract lobbyists where they work for a bunch of clients and they have their own business.
I just asked because I've never told you this, but I really enjoyed the day at the Capitol.
Yay.
And I'm planning on doing it every year because
Good.
I had so much fun when I was there. I was like, wow, this would be fun.
Really?
Like,
Fun.
maybe I should become a contract lobbyist.
So contract lobbyists, there are 2. So I've actually never been a contract lobbyist because in Indiana,
Because I didn't know if that was the only lobby. I'm
a lobbyist, and so
Yeah.
Rachel's a lobbyist, and we are employer-based, what would be called employer-based lobbyists. So I lobby only for the association. The contract lobbyists have a bunch of clients, and honestly, I wouldn't want that job.
No.
I wouldn't want that job. It's just you're following so many things for so many different people that that is the hardest way to lobby. It's not the fun. I think.
I feel like because you might not fully always believe in what you're lobbying for,
well, and
right?
most of them are not. None of them are subject matter experts. So even our lobbyists before Rachel came along, we had a contract lobbyist.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
We did, and it was a really small contract, and what I mean by that is it was a monitor-only contract, so the only thing she was doing for us was monitoring and telling me this is happening, and like she didn't talk to anybody, or so we had
She just showed up.
Yeah. It was a very small contract. And we were a teeny client, right? So she always had, she canceled a lot because she had other clients, and I got the fact that we were the smallest client, so that's fine. But she was basically their only job, a true contract lobbyist's only job here in Colorado is to take the bill that their client wants and push it through the process. They're not the subject matter experts. They don't testify. They can't help you put together a fact sheet or any of that stuff. All they do is in the building with the legislators. They are paid for the relationships they have with 100 legislators, that they can get them on the phone and that they know who they are, and like that's what they get paid for. In Indiana, that's not how it works. There are contract lobbyists, but as long as your organization is big enough, you had an employer lobbyist. And so I worked for the American Medical Association, the only people I lobbied for in Indiana. But that's all I did is state level work. That's it. And so I didn't do federal, I didn't do regional, I was the contract lobbyist and what I do here combined. And so I've done that job before. And I forgot where I was going with that. I forgot what the question was that we got off.
I said, so the contract lobbyist.
Yeah. Yes. And so
I was just like, this would be fun.
For people who, I technically am an introvert. Like I can be an extrovert, but from a personality standpoint, I'm an introvert. Contract lobbyists, they're better when they're extroverts because that's all you do is talk to people all day long. Legislators, other lobbyists, blah, 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 all day long. And so extroverts really get into it. And I know people that are like, yeah, I want it. That's what I want to do. But so I was that in Indiana for physicians. And the Indiana State Medical Association, which is who I was employed by, had an education reimbursement program that they would pay for a portion of your graduate degree, and it did not have to be related to what you did for them. And so after a year, I'm not sure they don't have it anymore, but this is a long time ago, but after a year when I qualified for it, that's the only way I was going to graduate school, so I'm like, yes, I'm taking you up on this. And so then I got a degree in urban planning. which I had wanted to do. I found urban planning like the last year I was in college, and I didn't have enough money to change majors and do studies over again. So I just like, whatever, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So I did it. So I got into graduate school when I was lobbying, and then when I graduated, took a job in urban planning and just left and completely switched fields. I started over as a planner one. Making nothing. My first job was in Colorado Springs. That's how I got out here.
Okay.
So I was in Indiana lobbying, and then I graduated, got a job in Colorado Springs planning. I spent 10 years in Colorado urban planning, and then the housing market blew up, and when that happened, planning jobs just evaporated. Those are the first jobs that go, right? Because you have to have the engineers, you have to have the construction people. You don't necessarily need the planners. You know, it's good to have them, but you can cut that part out and actually put up a building, and put up a school and put in a road, and so those jobs just evaporated, and so I ended up getting a job in policy, and so I went from policy to planning back to policy. But it's all, I mean, urban planning is the center point of politics, kind of social justice and social work and data. Right, those are the kind of the three corners, and policy is also politics and also data. It's just instead of the kind of social worky aspect, it's the campaigns and the straight out politics of the situation. So they're very similar fields. I used a lot of my skills for one and the other, and they help. One helps me with the other. I think I'm a better lobbyist because I was an urban planner, and I think I was a better urban planner because I was a lobbyist first. Yeah. So that's how I did it.
That's cool.
Like this. Most people don't. Lobbyists find their way to lobbying in a lot of ways. Urban planners pretty much graduate with an urban planning degree and go into the field.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot of, it's a straight line. But lobbyists, there are lobbyists who used to be finance people and used to be history majors. And the guy that did foreign affairs in the first congressional office I worked in had an art history degree. You know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So, what assets do you think your team here has now, and how do you plan to build upon them to hopefully someday work yourself out of a job?
I love this place. How many jobs have you had in your whole lifetime? How many different jobs?
Well, this is my first professional
job.
Career job, and then I had an unpaid internship, but I'm going to call that a job.
Yeah. No, you should call that a job. So you're young. I'm not. And I've had a lot of jobs. And this is one of the best team of people from the whole organization standpoint that I've ever worked with. Ever. Yeah. I was shocked when I first got here at the lack of, and this is true for the entire 4 years I've been here, the lack of like just office politics, the ease at which people coordinate with each other, even across pillars, right? And if somebody doesn't know,
even just getting this interview, like I'll be honest, I was a little nervous.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like, I've been in a lot of office environments that do not function this way.
Yeah.
And there are other chapters in this organization who do not function this way.
Yeah.
Because I talk to my colleagues across country. Honestly, our DC office does not function very much like this way. But the fact that I can walk down the hall and say, "Hey, Tina, I don't know anything about blah, and I need to know about blah because the legislator's asking, who do I ask?" And she's like, "Oh, here, talk to so-and-so, and so-and-so talk to me." The fact that we all come together to put on Day at the Capitol, to put on Walk. It's not your job to come to Day at the Capitol, but y'all do it. And it's not my job to do development, but whatever, where do you want me to show up?
Yeah.
Is not... in my experience, it is not. That's not a normal working environment. There's always office politics. There are always people like, and this job has the most talented. This place has the most talented people that are most open to coordinating and helping each other and just getting to the goal, right? Because everybody's got the mission in mind that I've ever worked. And so for me, the only thing I could ask, and this is actually happening, is that because I feel like I do far more in other pillars than other pillars do of what Rachel and I do, and that's honestly because you guys know less about what I do than I know about what you do. And it's our job to make it more accessible for you and to reach out to you guys to say, hey, you can do this for us and you can do this for us and here's how we make it easy. And so one of the things that I've been able to do just in the last month is and mainly since Rachel got here, is spend more time doing that, like putting together a package of instructions to say, hey, like the regional office staff just went out and did drop-bys on all the congressional offices, and putting together something where you guys understand why you're doing that, why it matters, what to do, and making it easy. That takes my time, but it
ultimately
gives you more of an insight into what we do, and the more you guys know about what we do, the more you can help us, not just we can help you.
Exactly.
And so I think, and that's just a matter of, honestly, resources and time. Everybody's got the home office, like, do it. And everybody's stressed out on time, so it's a matter of how do you make it as easy as possible? So yeah, that's kind of the goal is, I think for me, is that's what in the back of my head I'm thinking of, is once Rachel really gets on her feet and takes stuff off my plate, it's going to be more, how do I do more with advocacy at Walks? How do I do more with advocacy at Reason to Hope? How do I do more with advocacy at MIM? And be more creative about how to put advocacy into the other things we do, as opposed to just the other things we do into what I do.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel like advocacy too can be kind of an intimidating thing for some people.
It totally can.
I totally understand how you're feeling.
People don't grow up and say, I want to be a lobbyist. Or I want to be a dentist, right? That's the same category. No one does that. But yeah, it's actually quite simple. It's not rocket science, but people don't do it every day, and so they don't think about that. Programs I can understand as a family who has people who've gotten sick, and I get that, and I get development, and I get fundraising, but it's harder for you guys to get what we do than for us to get what you do. So it's not. It just is. Yeah.
So, what do you think the association does well then in terms of public policy?
I actually think the association as a whole, so not just our chapter, but the DC office, led by the DC office. This is, so I've worked in public policy for physicians, for community mental health centers, for family physicians specifically. I've never seen, the day I got here, and it's built out a lot in the last 4 years, but the day I got here, there was a structure in place to help me do advocacy here that I'd never seen anywhere.
Were you the first person hired in Colorado for advocacy?
I was. And there was enough materials and support and infrastructure that I had never seen that. I'd never seen any home office do that for anybody. Like that's more infrastructure than the physicians had to do advocacy. More tools, more support, more consistency across the country, right, than I had ever seen before. And now it's even more so. I mean, that when I first got here, there was that on the federal level, but there was nothing on the state level, and that was fine because I've been a state level lobbyist in 2 different state houses now, so to some extent I didn't necessarily need that. But now they're coming out with tools that are even helping me. It was like I got here and I was not 101 when I got here, and the tools were kind of 101 on the state level, and now they've caught up to they've hired enough public policy staff that have done this before they got here, that now they're catching on to the fact that, like, oh, we can't put out 101 tools because that doesn't help the corals and the whatever. And so now they're putting out tools that are actually helpful to me. And we actually just got told, this is not the first time by any means we've got told this, but Jason Crow, when he came to the Denver Walk, his staff were like, you guys are more organized, more efficient with our time, and more creative with how you are using us than any organization that we've ever dealt with. And granted, he's a new member of Congress, so he's only been in office for about a year, but still, they're just like, it's incredible the organization that you come to us with. You have everything already ready, you present it, we don't have to ask those questions, and honestly, I have never in all of my time in this business seen that kind of structure. So and it was here before the start of it was here before I even got here. So that's a testament to somebody at the top recognizing we need to do it and spending that money, not in the chapters, but in the DC office, for people to put together that infrastructure. So when people like me came along, I just fit right into it. That makes sense? Yeah. And Walk's probably like that too, I would assume. There's a lot of kind of now there's a lot of structure.
I feel like I have a little bit different experience because if you think about it, I have been the first one who has been hired on fully after the national merger. And I just with my past 2 years with the Larimer County Committee, like they have done Walk how they've done it for years and years and years and years. Where when I came on, I had just finished an internship with the American Cancer Society where I did 7 Relay for Lives in 10 weeks.
Wow.
Relay for Life is the exact same structure as Walk.
Oh, it is.
Exact same structure. And so I was like, oh, I got this.
Right.
I got this.
Right.
And plus I did Walk all throughout college because I was taking Kappa. And so I was like, I got this. And so I came into my committee and I was like, this is what we're doing. This is what, and they came back at me. And I think I finally got through the storm of them fighting against. But it's because the national merger, and they came up with a structure for what walk needs to look like. And this is what other people are doing successful. You should try it. Again, make it so it works in your community. So I think I've had a little bit different experience with that than some of the I don't want to say more seasoned,
people who were
but people were here before the merger. And I see that with people with like Marlene even still. Because she's been here for 10 years, and I'll say stuff, and she goes, well, it was never like that before.
And for me, the whole using volunteers thing wasn't a problem, because that the whole ambassador structure was about volunteers. And so I'm like, well, I'm doing that now. But now it's happening in the state level, and that's where the pushback is with public policy staff across the country, is you want us to do this at the state level, because honestly, almost nobody does it at the state level with advocates, and there's a reason for that. And not that it doesn't work, and not that is not helpful, but there's a reason we hired another staffer as opposed to investing in advocates. Like, at some point you need to be in the building and you need to understand the language, right? And advocates don't. And so, like it or not, you need enough staff that can talk to legislators in their speak in order to get something passed. The advocates are helpful, and they're absolutely supportive, and they absolutely can be the difference between passing something or not. But if you don't have those people who speak the language, it doesn't matter how many advocates you have. And so we're having some of the same kind of growing pains. Like, that's great, but someone's still got to do it.
So I think it's been a little bit different for me coming on. So, and just even with like a community like Steamboat, the Steamboat Walk got started because somebody worked at a care community and wanted to head it up. Well, with turnover in the industry, that person's not there anymore, and it's fell apart. It's fell apart, really. And so I feel like I'm coming in, and I'm really introducing a new walk in that community this next year if we end up having one.
And sometimes that's a good thing.
I'm trying to figure out, is it worth it to have it up here or not? Because I actually I was having a conversation with Aaron before I came up here, because having it at Casey's Pond and the turnover there.
So you have it at the community, at the original community, even though the person that started it's not there.
And the person that started it had the passion for it and the cause, and now it's kind of turned into more of a brand alignment thing, and they want to use it for marketing purposes. And Steamboat, when people think of dementia care, they want to think of Casey's Pond.
Oh, and so you're battling the
And I mean, their marketing person, who's now my main point of contact for the walk, has told me, well, I don't understand why you would not have the only support group in town, and it's not here.
So they're power playing here.
And so we're doing our community forum there tomorrow night, actually. And so before Thanksgiving, in September, I emailed the executive director trying to get a contact, like, okay, if we're going to do this again, I need a contact. And I finally got it before Thanksgiving. And because I think they're going to because they're a nonprofit too. They're going to their board, and I'm like, do we want to do this again? Because that's more feedback I got too, is like, well, you depend on us to do all the fundraising. Well, that's what it was started on. So, yes, we do. And so she finally emailed me back today and said she can't meet with us, really.
So would you just change the location and have it?
We're going to have to see how the community forum goes tomorrow.
Okay.
Because Colorado Mountain College does have a campus there.
Okay.
So that, or the high school, do it in the football field.
There's an event, but it's a matter of, can you get the people out?
And can I get the volunteers to back me, so I don't have to be up there all the time.
Well, that's the difficulty with lobbying and using volunteers, is that they're not always available, and then if they don't call their legislator, then that legislator hasn't gotten contacted. And so again, at some point, you need someone in the building that can make sure that things get done. And we're in the same kind of boat with that. But I will say, I have never seen an infrastructure. I'd never seen an infrastructure like that when I got here, and it's fantastic. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's the best of all worlds is that infrastructure paired with someone who's done this before, paired with like a contract lobbyist that can sit in the building. Like, you can't really. That's it. That's the gold standard. Like, you could do most of what you wanted if you had all that.
Yeah. Okay. Do one more. one more question.
Yeah.
Sorry. Because a lot of my questions we've already answered.
Yeah.
I had a good one. What's your biggest personal accomplishment and then any organization you've worked for?
My biggest personal accomplishment. I was involved in Indiana. Well, no. I was involved in Indiana when I was lobbying for the American Medical Association. This was a long time ago. It was back in the tobacco settlement days. So,
Okay.
You're aware of the tobacco settlement. So, basically, the tobacco companies got busted for knowing that tobacco was
came from ACS.
Yes,
So, yes.
Yes. So back in the tobacco settlement days, we were part of a team trying to push a package of tobacco control anti-smoking initiatives through Indiana, which is a pretty rural Republican community. So, and everything from removing the vending machines from places that weren't a bar, to banning billboards, to the whole slate of laws that Indiana had none of, right? And so we came with them with a whole package, and we had this coalition, and we passed it. We passed it through the Indiana General Assembly, but really only but at some point, at some point, that because the tobacco lobbyists swarmed. All this money came in from out of state, blah blah blah. The governor had to get involved, and basically we got it past the House, and then the governor had to go to this head of the Senate and say, "You're going to pass it, or we're going to do this regulatorily, and I'm going to give them everything they want. So it'd be in your best interest to pass it." And it got passed, and so almost all of I was one of 3 lobbyists that were pushing that package. It was the biggest thing I did that session, and from a how it transformed the environment in that state. It was probably the biggest thing I've ever done, I've ever been a part of. But they all got passed, and so the only reason we came this close to banning smoking in high school gymnasiums. And I know you might think what? But in Indiana, that's a thing. To not go to your son's basketball game and be able to light a cigarette in that gymnasium was a huge bleeping deal. And we came one vote short. they took that provision or that section of the bill, and they dumped it in its own bill because it was going to take down the rest of them. So the rest of the stuff passed. So they banned billboards, the vending machines. What else? They provided more funding for enforcement. For cops to go check to make sure people weren't selling to underage, those kind of things, the whole suite of laws. And that one provision got carved into its own bill and lost by 1 vote in the Senate. We came this close to banning cigarettes in the 90s. This was in the 90s. In Indiana gyms and on school property. Would have banned it on all school cigarette smoking on all school property except for a teacher's lounge that was ventilated not to the outside, which was huge. And even though that didn't pass, that was a bigger deal to me. That was harder to do, to get that almost passed, than that whole other suite of bills. Not that the whole other suite of bills weren't hard to pass, but getting that almost passed was a bigger accomplishment to me. Because in Indiana, that, when we first started, we didn't have a quarter of the General Assembly, and when we were done, we lost by 1 Senate vote.
So what do you think led to the success of that?
To the success of
passing all those bills and getting that close? I mean, I don't know if you'd call it a success, but personal accomplishment. What led to that?
Definitely a personal accomplishment.
So you can still call that a success.
A whole crap load of lobbying, and lobbying. It was the coalition, really, because when we started, it was us, it was the hospital association, and I can't even remember who the third party was anymore. It was us, the hospitals, and another healthcare organization that was smaller, maybe the public clinics, the rural health clinics. By the time we ended, we actually had independent bars and restaurants on board. So the association of those folks were saying, no, this will kill our business. And we had probably half a dozen bars that were like, it would increase our business if we could say that we'd advertise this, that we don't do this, and it would increase our business. So we chipped away, which is a basic strategy of lobbying. if the trade associations over here, if you can peel off some of their members to come testify for you the other direction, and that's what we ended up doing. So for every big trade association that said this is awful, except the tobacco companies, that said this is awful, it will put us out of business, we can't possibly do this, we just got half a dozen of their or to a dozen of their members to write letters, to come to the rallies with us, to speak at the press conferences with us, to testify, to talk to their legislators. I was responsible for the doctors that were members of the association I worked for and mobilizing them, but I ended up helping to mobilize other people's advocates because I had to. It wasn't cutting it just to mobilize my advocates, and so I ended up with 2 other people coordinating whole other advocates that we weren't even responsible for. That's what did it, and I spent probably half my session on that package of bills, and probably 50% of my time on just that one that didn't pass. And I also got with 2 other people, a Medicaid reimbursement rate increase passed that the governor vetoed. We got passed through the General Assembly, and the governor vetoed it because there was a budget shortage. Yeah, in Indiana. Because that's a super hard thing to get passed. But Indiana does more. Here in Colorado, the legislature won't really pass Medicaid reimbursement. They just send you the agency, and they're like, that's what the agency does. But in Indiana, if you could get legislators to actually say, Medicaid reimbursement is now this for this service. And we got family physicians, anesthesiologists, and one other category of physician, like a 30% increase in their Medicaid reimbursement rates, and the governor vetoed it. So it got all the way to governor. So we got it through the General Assembly. So that was pretty. Yeah. It didn't pass either, and I don't think that ever went into law. But I spent a lot of time on it, and had it been signed, that would have definitely been my proudest accomplishment, because that's hard. Getting Medicaid reimbursement rates increase is hard. So technical stuff. I look back at that and I'm like, how hard is it? For me, it's not necessarily here. The accomplishment will be us not existing, right? But
so, what do you think your hardest part that you're dealing with right now is, besides delegating? I don't know if you'd call it delegating, but getting more of us involved in what you do. Like,
what's the biggest challenge?
Yeah, what biggest challenge you have?
Just flat out a lack of resources. I have not been fully staffed. Fully staffed is actually me and Rachel. I've not been fully staffed for 4 years, and so the hardest part for me for 4 years has been I can't do anything 100%. So how do you get as much done not doing 100% of everything? And so that's the thing that for me, I said my biggest accomplishment over the last year is getting Rachel on board, because just having that additional staffer will allow me to do things that never even made it to my to-do list, right? I never did half of my to-do list, but there's stuff that never made it to my to-do list that we're going to now do, and almost nobody is doing it in the state. And if you're almost nobody uses advocates in the state house. Like, that's just not a thing that happens here. And the fact that we have them, we only have 12 state champions, about a dozen state champions. We've only used them for one session, but I already have colleagues of mine in other organizations coming to me and saying, how did you do that? Because nobody does it, and because we're first out of the gate doing it, it's going to be more influential until everybody catches up with us. Yeah. So it's doing the things that the biggest challenge is just finding enough time to do what I know I should be doing. Because at the State Medical Association in Indiana, there were 4 of us. So there was my boss, me, we had a half research assistant, half lobbyist that worked for us, that lobbied part-time and did research part-time, and we had a full-time admin. So we had a staff of 4 people, and I didn't have any federal responsibilities, I didn't have any regional responsibilities, and I wasn't on the leadership team of that association. So all I did was the state portion of my job, and there were 4 of us doing it. And so I know all these things I want to be doing that I've done before, but I can't do because I don't have time for. So I'd say that's the most challenging thing for me, is coming in here every day knowing, I even know how to do that. I've done it before, but just not having the time to do it. So you do as much as you can with what you got. Okay. And you know what that's like. We all know what that's like. And we're all getting very accustomed to what that's like now as the goals are going up, and you know.
I just I'm in 2 classes right now, so I just finished a philanthropy class last night, and it kind of led, we started talking about individual donors and true motivations on why people donate, and a lot of it was focused on the tax law.
Oh yeah.
And
especially, is it true that the higher amounts you give, the more that makes a difference?
What makes a difference is the standard deduction went up.
Oh, okay. That line.
So nobody, 95% of Americans aren't itemizing anymore, and when you don't itemize, there's no incentives.
Yep.
And even though yes, people want to donate and do good,
they think about it.
The tax law was a big
Yeah,
incentive for people.
Yeah.
And if you think about it too, it gives 501c3 charities, it kind of makes their status irrelevant now. Because if they're not getting the tax write-off, they could still, they could give to a GoFundMe and still fulfill the intrinsic desire to help someone.
Right, yeah.
If they're like, it doesn't matter on my taxes.
That is true, yeah.
And so, what, basically, my professor and then like all the research we did said, in terms of donors and fundraising until 2021, we're kind of like in an uncertain time on how charitable giving is shifting.
Because nobody knows how fast it's going to shift.
The Form 990s published are 2 years behind.
Well, and I would assume that there are people out there that while they think about it, they're not giving enough.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? You have to, because it's a percentage of what you're giving. Unless you're giving a certain amount, it's not even going to matter. And it's $5 in your taxes. No one thinks about that.
No.
But when it becomes $1,000 in your taxes, people think about that.
And so last year, a lot of people weren't educated on it.
Yeah.
And I feel like still a lot of people still aren't educated on it. But this year, people are going and knowing what it's like.
Right.
And so I'm just I wonder what next year's going to be like.
There's a whole chunk of the middle class because of the federal tax cut that their taxes. I got half of the rebate that I got last year. I'm in that section that just got screwed.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have mattered how much I donated. My refund just went boom.
Yep.
And so I personally think that would affect people more than knowing the tax law, because that's that's what they see, money in their pocket.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'm not gonna, if they only got half of their refund, they're gonna assume they're only getting half of the refund, and then maybe I don't write that check because I'm not gonna get that in my refund.
Yeah, and even just with inflation, people got to take care of their families before they give too. Housing
costs going up.
And then it went into grant making process, and how that's evolving.
Yeah.
And then it went into charity watchdog sites and the overhead myth and how nonprofit organizations are viewed, and
they talk about. I was in an organization once, which I will not name. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist anymore. So I won't name it. This is part of the reason it doesn't exist anymore. It's because of weird stuff like this. But they looked up how to get people. They looked up how to get on like a BBB rating or on Charity Navigator.
Or like Trevor, yeah.
And they did the minimum they had to do publicly to get that rating, and then they were done. And that. Specifically, 2 people were tasked to figure out how to get us a rating, do the minimum you need to do, and it wasn't about we want to be a great charity. It was just about the what people were seeing. Yeah.
How many years ago was that? What year was that?
It would have been, let's see, probably